The Starkey Round Barn was built in 1902 by the Conrad Starkey family. Before coming to Webster County in Nebraska, the Starkey family had made their fortune in the Milwaukee area where they owned various business interests around the Great Lakes. Sometime around 1880, Conrad Starkey purchased 400 acres of land along the Republican River Valley, thanks to encouragement from his brothers-in-law Gottlieb and Christian Rasser. It was on this land that the Starkey Round Barn was constructed. The Starkey Round Barn is the largest of its type in the world. It is 130 feet in diameter and the center silo is 65 feet high. With 3 levels, the barn contains over 40,000 square feet of space. The top level was for hay storage, the middle level for machinery and grain storage, and the basement was for livestock. The brick silo in the center was for feed storage. In addition to its unique design, one of the more interesting aspects of the barn is how it was built. The barn's framework is held together by tension and stress without any aid from nails or pegs. The 12x12 supporting timbers were shipped to Nebraska by rail from the Great Lakes region. Starkey Farms was a successful dairy until the herd contracted tuberculosis in the early 1920s. In 1929, at the foreclosure auction, the farm was purchased by Walter and Will Rasser.
I think my first question for everyone is, if you can think of just one thing that comes to your mind when you think about the barn and the Amboy area in general.
Well, I bet I was born the closest to the barn.
I bet you, well, were you born out here? You were.
2-story white frame house that was up here at the junction of the railroad and the highway.
Uh-huh.
And my dad worked for Amboy Milling, so.
Oh yeah, tell us a little bit about the mill.
Well, there's a lot of history in the mill, and
Yeah.
That's where I earned my first quarter. On a Saturday afternoon. Of course, they worked 6 days a week, the whole thing, and they were sacking up chick scratch or something that came in 25-pound bags, and you had to weigh it, and then they had this wonderful little thing that was a wire, and you put around it, and you pulled this thing, and it curled all that wire up, so the bag didn't leak. And he remembers swimming in the mill race. I didn't learn to swim, they just threw me in.
And the mill race was like up the road, north and
North of the mill.
east.
North of the mill.
Yeah, I've been up there.
And then, of course, the canal went clear up to the next road, and there was a dam in Elm Creek up there.
And what year was this?
Well, I was born in 31, and we left here probably in 43. So I was
in
12
the late 30s.
when we left.
Okay.
I was born in 1929. That was quite a vintage year. All the banks went broke and I came along.
That's kind of what my mom
We
said.
lived south of Idavale, and we had a house and barn across the line in Kansas. So really I was a Kansan back in those days, and then my grandfather lived down the creek a quarter of a mile on the Nebraska side. I can't tell you the year, but it was early on when I was just a boy. We loaded up a load of wheat, my grandfather and I. We were buddies, of course. We loaded up a load of wheat and brought it down to Amboy to the mill, and we went home with a load of flour.
Well, I remember a little bit about the mill also. Of course, my parents, they got all their flour there too, and I don't know, I must have been in high school before I had any store-bought bread.
Yeah. Where did you live?
I lived north of the golf course, up by the corner of the feedlot.
Yeah.
The thing I remember about the barn is my dad would say, "Have you seen that round barn? It's been built and with no nails."
No, so amazing.
And so we'd take the gravel road that was not used very often, and we'd come up to 136, and we'd drive down this way, and we didn't come in, but we could see through the trees the barn. And one of the purposes that my dad liked to come was he said the Rasser boys grew the best corn in the country. And he liked to look at that corn.
Wow.
Well, we were talking about that a little bit, and you know, they, I think, were some of the early ones that were fortunate enough to have some irrigation on their ground, and they had a water right out of Elm Creek back in '34,
Wow.
and another one in '39. So they maybe were you know, benefiting from that in those years, especially when, you know, in the '30s. That would have been just a lifesaver.
The barn was my playhouse.
Oh, okay.
And I'm sure if the Rassers knew what we were doing in there, they'd have chased us off. 'Cause my mother is a twin, and I have a twin cousin that was born 3 days before I was. And his version of this story is going to be, Neil got me into a lot of trouble. And my version is, Floyd always got Neil into a lot of trouble. But we just used and abused it.
Looks good.
I remember the green bins around the edge that they would just pull in and back up and shove it out
Yeah.
the tailgate of it. And the biggest thing was all horses weren't compatible with the barn.
Oh.
When they would walk, it was hollow.
Oh, it bothered them.
It bothered them.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of times they had to use a team that was from here, if you
Yeah.
were doing silage or harvesting.
You had to
threshing.
change teams before you could take it in. Do you remember the beet cellar? You know, under the driveway that goes into the top level, there's a huge root cellar. I mean, it's just massive, and it goes all the way back in the ground. And apparently, at some point, they grew some kind of big sugar beet type root as part of the cattle feed. At least that's the story I've heard.
There's two of them actually, and they go the full length of that, and then there's those squares on top of
Yeah.
the driveway
Vents. Yeah.
where you could drop them in, and then you can see also there's some vents there too.
Yeah.
So was this a childhood sweetheart deal or something like that?
Well,
Kinda.
I'll tell
Pretty
a little-
much.
I'll tell a little story about that. We started going out together in high school in the summer, and we were supposed to go to the movies, and we decided to go to the baseball game instead, so that's where we were. And Ron's parents needed the good car for some emergency, so they came and hunted us down, and we had to switch cars so they could take the family car, and we took the little Rambler for the rest of our date. And we came out here to change things out, and that was the first time I'd ever seen the barn up close. And
Oh.
so he said, well, do you want to see the barn? And I said, well, sure I do, because my dad had told me about it, and I was always imagining how many horses I could fit in there. It seemed to me like it was almost just made for that purpose. But anyway, so he took me out there, and we drove in, and we drove all the way around the inside of the barn
In the Rambler.
in the Rambler, and I was so impressed. I just was in awe.
Well, was Walter and Will a true partnership, or did they just kind of have their own thing? I knew they farmed together.
I don't know exactly. They just basically, I think they just farmed together, but they bought the Starkey property together, because when they decided not to farm together anymore, they kind of just decided that Walter would take this part and Will would take that part, and so it was not real formal, but I think maybe they were both on the title at that time, and it was not a hard. It was hard for them to quit farming together, but it wasn't hard to separate. You know,
Because I remember going across the road to Will's, and they'd be separating, and we were right before the pigs. We could have the skim milk. And once in a while, was her name Lena?
yes, Will's wife.
Yes.
Yes.
She would feel sorry for us, and she'd dip a little cream back in.
When nobody was looking.
Put it back in the skim milk. Is there a history of the orchard?
Well, there is a little bit. this orchard, of course, we planted, what's remaining. But we have that picture out in the long shed that was from 1949, and I've blown it up. It's pretty good size now. And that has a well-established orchard in it. And I know that there's been people over the years that have told us that there was pretty much always fruit out here.
Apple orchard?
Apples, and then also
Pears.
pears and peaches.
I think they lost all the peaches in an Armistice Day freeze, and that was probably maybe 40, 41.
Okay.
But the peaches had just started to bear, and they were what we would think of as a Colorado peach. You know, and of course, your memory kind of fools you once in a while, but they lost all the peach trees. They had all the innovations on this place that was available at the time.
Yeah.
Right,
You know,
yes.
I asked Liz one time when we were here, nobody could figure out how after the 35 flood, they could afford to hire cats and fill in all the holes and stuff. And they were farming again in 36.
Wow.
And everybody else was sitting there waiting for of course, the little
Equipment.
trees were all coming up.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't thought about that it would have ruined all those fields.
But they actually got land planes in, and they were
Yeah.
farming the next year.
Now the story goes that when the Starkeys got this tractor, it was one of the first steel-wheeled tractors in the area. So they called up all the neighbors and said, "Hey, come on out and we're going to demonstrate our new tractor." And they took it down in the river bottom and proceeded to get it stuck in the mud up to the hubs. And I always wondered how they got it back out, because it wasn't like you could call the neighbors up and say, "Hey, bring your 40-20 down here and give us a pull." But that was the Starkeys. They were always showboating. There's the barn, and then this is the little ice house that's still here. My trees are about right here. And then you can see clear up to where this is 136, but this was taken in 49, I think. There's orchards there, and of course this was Will's place up here on the hill. And this is the barn where they isolated the Starkey cattle when they found they had tuberculosis.
Oh, yeah.
They quarantined them,
Yeah.
and then they had to destroy the herd. And that was what really sealed their fate as far as losing the property and so forth. So
Do you know what they did with the condemned animals?
I think they had to be destroyed because in 1922, they had the record milk and butter producing cow in the state of Nebraska. And they traveled all over the country to buy up all this high-powered breeding stock. They were bidding against all these very affluent people like DuPonts and so forth. And so they probably contracted it bringing those cattle in, because I'm sure there wasn't the things in place like we have now for inspections and so forth. They just didn't have much to fall back on. And then they had borrowed, and the Aetna Life Insurance Company sued them because they owed them money. And then, well, actually, I think two brothers passed away, and that's what started all the foreclosure, because they couldn't settle the estates.
The barn was just a beautiful place. We used it, and just lots of memories there.
If any of these stories has interested you, or you'd like to see the Starkey Round barn yourself, please schedule a tour of the barn to see many of the original fixtures and learn more of the barn's history.